What's up, guys and gals? It's your host with the most, Griever, as always, bringing you guys some more Ayakashi Triangle, Chapter 124 review, entitled Closeness to Suzu. Now, the later half of this chapter has a few interesting things to talk about, but the first half of the chapter, in all honesty, we can crumple up like a ball of paper and throw it behind us because it gave us nothing. And I mean nothing. No new information that we didn't already know. In fact, the big thing that, an Ayakashi's energy, a spiritual energy signature would be differing, and this kind of idea, then because they were testing boy Matsuri and girl Matsuri and trying to figure out which one was which. But they literally already did that. With Grandpa and people like that already said, their spiritual energy is identical. They both have the Winjutsu. They feel the same and all that stuff. So I don't know what they were expecting to find from these tests, but everything had already been determined when this first happened. So this experiment was a dud. They acknowledged it as a dud, but it realistically, it just went nowhere. And I honestly felt like, really, we're really dragging this out, aren't we? We're really dragging this part out, because the later half of the chapter it felt like that part didn't need to happen quite yet, like maybe a little later, because the later part actually physically shows it, good use of the paneling on screen, but also told us straight up that boy Matsuri is feeling a little jealous, envious, frustrated, any of these emotions, because Suzu is closer to girl Matsuri currently. Now, the reasoning Suzu gives is 100% legitimate. 100%. And makes a lot of sense to me, and I like it. Fact of the matter is, had this not happened, and had girl Matsuri turned back into just regular old plain boy Matsuri and no duplicates, there wouldn't be a problem with closeness, there wouldn't be a problem with familiarity, there wouldn't be a problem. There would be a learning, but here's the key thing. There would still be an adjustment period. Not that Suzu isn't in love with Matsuri. Heart, body, soul. All that bit. But, as has been brought up, and it's a very touchy subject for a lot of people, but has been brought up in this manga before, Suzu is still, at the end of the day, in love with Matsuri, but wants a relationship. She is still technically, for all intents and purposes, she's still straight. She's still heterosexual, and she wants Matsuri to turn back into a boy. And Matsuri is the one who's like, you know what, we will start dating, because she's sort of leaning towards it because she's so in love, and hormones are running rampant, more so than anything else. Now, you could make the argument that Suzu might be bisexual or whatever, and maybe this is an awakening for her. She's a teenager, hormones are going nuts. So, but what I like about this chapter, and maybe you disagree with all of what I just said there, but what I liked about this chapter specifically was, regardless that there's two Matsuris, and we actually see this in a clear divide about halfway through the chapter, they're walking and stuff, and it's not because Shirogane's actually walking in front, if you pay close attention to the panels, but there's this big wide spread when boy Matsuri brings up, you seem closer and more concerned with girl Matsuri than me, and then we see the shot. They're walking almost holding hands side by side, and boy Matsuri is not only a step behind, half a step behind, but also a further distance. There's a gap, there's a space between Suzu and boy Matsuri. So it's represented paneling wise, and I like that, but also it's told to us straight up. Boy Matsuri is being very, I think, affirmative is not the word, but just being upfront. He's being very upfront about, hey, this is how I feel. I'm noticing these things. What do you got to say about it? So instead of holding that classic, resentment, instead of talking to the other person about things, this is why a lot of marriages fail in the real world. Nobody will goddamn open up a dialogue and talk. And at the very least, even though boy Matsuri, and we're seeing in this chapter, like we've seen in the previous one, is frustrated, is envious, is got a lot of shit going on, still at least is trying to a degree to, hey, open a dialogue, I'm upset by this, I'm noticing these things, what's going through your head, sort of idea, and asking what's going on. So I definitely enjoyed that aspect of the chapter, because as I said before, going back to the original point, which I know people will probably, if anybody watches these, are just going to focus on the fact that I said Suzu's straight, and then I corrected. Maybe she's bisexual now, who knows. But we already had the big chapter where she was sort of like, when she was worried that Matsuri was never going to become a guy again, she sort of went, yeah, but that's not who you are, sort of idea. And once again, a very touchy subject in 2022, 2023 now, this type of thing. But either way, I like the idea because of showcasing this, because even if one Matsuri had turned back, there would still be an adjustment period, because she's used to now, for weeks and months, she's used to Matsuri as a girl, and looking a certain way, smelling a certain way, acting a certain way. Yes, it's still Matsuri, but physical appearance, it's like, whoa, okay, there's a bit of a change here. There would be still an adjustment period. There would still be an adjustment period where they would get back. They would get back very quickly to the same closeness they've currently bonded over the last, 124 chapters. They would still retain that closeness, but there would still be, I would argue, an adjustment period where Suzu would sort of be like, not feel that same level of closeness, but it wouldn't be as pronounced and noticed if there wasn't the comparison. Because the comparison is here, it's picked up on and it's noticed. And that's the big key thing. And that's actually something that I like that they're doing with this sort of double Matsuris in the picture sort of idea, right? It works to show off a lot of different angles of how this would work. And the fact that it might be gender bender manga, but it's also got the romantic element where it's like, yeah, but we're not just doing gender bender. Oh, I like girl version or girl too. Like Rosary plus Vampire did this with a dual personality of someone that the main character was in love with and sort of had to pick one personality sort of idea. Now we have the same idea. And even though it's supernatural that it's happening, it still works very effectively to ask some of the hard questions and open up some of the dialogues, which is what Boy Matsuri is doing. And Suzu answers honestly and in a way that, yeah, even if this situation, let's say it's the end of the manga, and Matsuri turns back into a boy and everything's hunky-dory and they get to date, fine dandy, I would argue that this conversation may or may not have still been brought up, albeit in a different way. It would have been like, I felt like I was almost closer to you when I was a girl. And, this might last a week, couple weeks, maybe even a month. Eventually, they'd get back to that level of closeness, but there'd still be an adjustment. And, of course, because Girl Matsuri is still here, though, as a constant reminder, that gap, that physical gap we're actually seeing here in the manga is a great representation of saying that this gap is not going to get bigger, but it's also not going to get smaller. Not while on the left-hand side, or I guess it would be her right, on the right-hand side of Suzu is still the big elephant in the room, is that the Matsuri she's been now grown the closest to, and the one she's most familiar with, is right here. So there is a subconscious level of a comparison and a feeling of, okay, I'm more close to this version of you than this version, because right now this is the way it is. So, as I said, you took like the first 10 pages that just did some Ichi shit with Rio, and it was just like, let's just an excuse for people to dress up in nurses' uniforms, hence the cover page. And then we get into some really good topics, some really good discussion topics, I think, which is manga. Once again, the problem that I have sometimes analyzing instead of just reviewing or live reacting to this manga is because of, all the different groups out there and all the different movements or whatever you want to call them. At the end of the day, it's hard to bring up gender bender manga and talk about, well, this is the way it is and stuff without coming off and sounding like you're saying something else. It's like, no, wait a minute, this is a supernatural element, been around a long time, that kind of idea, right? So sometimes I sort of, choose not to analyze certain chapters as heavily as a result of just not wanting people not to see what I'm saying and taking this one topic, which I think is very good. It's all about relationships is my point. It's got nothing to do in this particular instance with gender, sexuality, anything like that. This is about communication and relationships, but sometimes, things can be misunderstood, and stuff like that. So And this chapter is one of those. Hopefully nobody read the wrong thing into what I was saying there, but I just think it's really good on Boy Matsuri's part to say, hey, I'm noticing these changes. Suzu to acknowledge them and not dismiss them and answer the question honestly, even though it makes Girl Matsuri feel elated, it makes Boy Matsuri more frustrated, and Suzu's caught between a rock and a hard place. You know, even though the supernatural element is there, this is not uncommon in a lot of relationships. This is the more so with the idea of the person you want them to be and who they truly are. Sometimes you could read that part into it. It could be a psychological read you could do. There's a lot you could read into this scene, and the big talks about honesty and open communication with someone that you're either courting, using an old-fashioned term there, or dating, or will be dating, you know, so courting. But anyways, yeah, so I find this just incredibly interesting. And then the end part I really like. Shadow Mai is back, and of course she would know she of all people, it makes the most sense, she would know which one's the fake and which one's not. Or not a fake now, because I have a feeling that they ain't gonna pull that stunt. I feel like now one's became an Ayakashi and one hasn't, because she literally is. She was a human being. She was the Ayakashi, you know, priestess, the Ayakashi medium. She is still herself, but now her actual self is now in a young, you know, spirit form that merges with Shirogane. Her reincarnation is alive, and now she herself has become an Ayakashi. So if anything, she has all forms of this. She is the master of knowledge when it comes to this type of idea. And if anyone was going to be able to, yep, you're this and you're that, you know, it would be her. Because she's literally the walking embodiment of what is happening between the two Matsuris right now. One is a human being with the Haku life and all that stuff, and the other one is an Ayakashi. She has been both, and both the versions of herself are literally walking beside these two Matsuris alongside her own self as an Ayakashi. So if anybody's going to be able to realize it, and she's sort of surprised in a way, she's like, they haven't figured it out, the ninjas, you know, this type of stuff. So either way, I just found it a good insight chapter. If you read deep enough into the paneling and how each character responds and the actual dialogue itself, very well placed dialogue, very well placed scene, greatly shown, and brings up a lot of these relationship and communication issues. And the funny thing is, nothing's resolved here, and things you could argue are even going from bad to worse, but it's still healthy communication. It's still honest, open, and healthy communication is happening right here. So I like that. I really do. I like that they're showcasing that. You get a lot of, to use, I guess, a new age term these days, you get a lot of toxic versions of relationships and communication, especially in fiction. Things are romanticized to a point of appearing like, what a great couple and stuff. It's like, no, their relationship, do not model after this, right? Here's an example of something you should be doing in your relationship. Every time you notice something you're just curious about, you like, or you dislike. And the big thing is, people will always say, hey, you look really pretty today. That's easy. It's much harder to say, hey, I really don't like your new haircut. That is the hardest conversation to say. When you have something you dislike, whether it's a personal preference, whether it's noticing something like this, like a behavior or anything like that, no one wants to open, because nobody wants conflict, nobody wants confrontation, and nobody wants to have the difficult conversations. It's much easier to have the nice ones where you say, where did you get that dress, babe? It looks awesome on you, you know? Where did you go get your hair? You should go there next time because I really like what you did with it. Those are so easy. Those compliments and conversations are easy to have. Or noticing, hey, you know that place that we like closed and stuff like that. An observation conversation. But to talk about something negative or something that you dislike, a lot harder when you're worried about the consequences of the other person. So I think this is showcasing a very good way of going about that, whether it's an easy conversation or not. So anyways, so for that reason alone, even though the first half of the chapter kind of doesn't matter, we already had that information and it was just there for fluff, The later half, very vital, very important, and if you read as deep as I'm doing, which maybe is too deep, maybe we're going way off the deep end with this, it showcases a lot of good behaviors and good ways to handle certain situations. Even if the end result, which in Boy Matsuru's case is not what he wanted to hear, he still was willing to open up the dialogue. So, very good for him there. But that's it for me. Hope you guys enjoyed Ayakashi Triangle Chapter 124, entitled Closeness to Suzu review. What Shadow Mai gonna be? Is she gonna be in the next chapter 125? Is she gonna reveal? Is this storyline sort of slowly coming to a close and maybe a little quick here? Who knows? Are we gonna find out which one's real? And what will they do when we find out which one is the Ayakashi? What's gonna happen? Who knows? We'll have to wait and see what happens next time. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like, comment, and subscribe. And we will be here next time for Chapter 125 of Ayakashi Triangle. Sayonara, everyone. Have a good one.